So it was 1978. I was 21. You can do the math. It was 3 a.m. I was very drunk in the back seat of a cab and in Russia. So I had gone to Russia to improve my language skills. I had studied Russian for a couple years in college, but at that time we were using this kind of modern series that was really a satire on Soviet life. So our stories that we were studying were about the Soviet shock workers, the udarniki, and their work in the factories and driving cement mixers. And then their counterpart were the hooligans who sat in the park and smoked cigarettes. And these were really kind of funny stories and fun to read, but the vocabulary was not particularly helpful for most everyday situations, like giving directions or being in a cab and being drunk. So I was in Russia, and I'd been there for 3 months, and my language had actually improved quite a bit. Well, maybe not quite a bit. It had improved. So I was now functioning at maybe the level of a 3-year-old, I think. I could ask directions. I could order food in a restaurant. I could buy things in the store. But what I had really excelled at in my time in Russia was improving my alcohol tolerance. So I'd gone there as a fairly light drinker, but was really up to the level where I could pound back the vodka shots with the best of them. So after our study in Moscow for 3 months, we were a group of students who were traveling around, and we were now in what was then called Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. And we had decided to go out, a couple of us to go out to kind of celebrate, sort of the end of our trip. So we'd gone to a local bar to enjoy the local alcohol. And so we were drinking for a while, and I got up to go to the ladies' room, and I came back and realized that I did not recognize anyone else that was still in the bar. And I don't know where the guys I had come with had gone, but I was now there by myself. So the bartender seemed to sense that I was in some trouble and called a cab. I assume he called a cab, because soon I found myself in the back seat of a cab. So I was in the back seat of a cab with this cab driver. Now, I am from rural Indiana. I had never been in a cab in the United States before, let alone in a cab in Russia. So I had no idea how this was going to work, and I really didn't know where I was or where I was going either. So the cab driver, I was trying to, so at my best, my Russian language was rudimentary, and being drunk, it was pretty non-existent. So I was trying to, I didn't know where I was going, so there was really not much I could say. But finally, the cab driver kind of kept asking me about, did I have a key? And that was a vocabulary word I knew. So I pulled out my key, and this was before the day of kind of key cards, and this was an old sort of brass key, and it had the name or address or something stamped on it. So I sort of handed it to the guy, and I said, do you know this place? And he nodded, and he lit a cigarette, and I was like, okay, what do we do now? What's the next part? And nothing seemed to happen, so I thought, well, maybe he is waiting for me to give him some money, to be sure I had money to pay for this trip. So I kind of pull him. I have no idea what a cab ride in Leningrad in 1978 cost. I didn't know how far I was going or anything. So I just pulled out some money, and I kind of handed him this money. And he started to drive. And as he turned down this kind of quiet residential street, I started to think that maybe this had not been the best strategy. Because now he had my key and all my money. And I was still drunk in the back seat, and I didn't know where I was or where I was going. And it was starting to feel a little scary as we kind of seemed to meander through the streets of Leningrad, not really making a lot of progress towards any place that seemed to be kind of like where a hotel might be. And I started to think well, should I just get out? Maybe when he stops the cab, I should just jump out. And I thought, well, it's deserted streets. I'm in the middle of, I don't know where I am. I don't have any money. I don't have a key. Which is better, to stay in this cab or to be on the street? And we had been told in our orientation to beware of young Soviet men who might try to approach us and try to, endear themselves to us so there's a way to get out of the country. And so I was kind of prepared for that. And we had also been, warned about people who might give us letters and packages on the street and ask them to take it back to the United States to mail for them. So I was prepared for that. But orientation had not covered this particular situation. So I wasn't really sure what to do, and I was really getting kind of nervous, and we did seem to be taking quite a while to get anywhere. But then we did turn a corner, and I saw what I then recognized as the hotel where I was staying. And he pulled up and parked the cab, and I got out and walked away as quickly as I could, and then I heard him yell behind me, "Devushka," which is, like young lady. And I stood there for a minute, and I later learned that this ride should have taken only a couple of minutes and only cost a couple of rubles. So I clearly had both literally and figuratively been taken for a ride that night. But it turned out, when I turned back to see that it turned out he's not a complete hooligan, because as I turned back, he was holding out my key, and he did give me my key back.